If you've been on my channel for any length of time, you know that I'm a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons as a whole. Uh, Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, I've got over 30 years of investment in those worlds, novels, video games, tabletop gaming, and beyond. But the OGL fiasco has created this scenario where I stripped the OGL out of our 5th edition product and made it a system agnostic product because I can no longer support the OGL, and what Wizards of the Coast did to the D&D brand is something that's going to take a lot of time to recover from. And if you've been on my channel for any length of time, you have seen me criticize the management at Wizards of the Coast, and you have seen me criticize some of the things that Kyle Brink has said in the public eye since he has come out and made some posts on the D&D Beyond page and some interviews. But despite being critical of some of the things he has said, I also realize the position that he's in, and I have said in the public as well that a lot of what he has said has been PR spin. It's stuff that he has to say because he's employed by Wizards of the Coast. And that doesn't mean anything bad. If I love my job and I'm working at a place where I love my work and I love my team, right? And that's what Dungeons and Dragons is for a lot of people. It's a place where they love to work. They love to work on at Wizards of the Coast because they love Dungeons and Dragons. And for those people, if the management has made a misstep, it's going to hurt. But they still have a responsibility at the end of the day to try to make things better and to try to move everything forward so that the rest of the team doesn't get hurt. I've been out here in the public saying that despite the fact that I don't support the OGL stuff, and I'm against the fact that like the CEO still hasn't made his face present. Cynthia Williams, the president, still hasn't made her face present. Like we still haven't seen these people out there accepting any responsibility for anything. Instead, we've got the executive producer Kyle Brink here. I've criticized that heavily on my channel. So as we get into the next part of this conversation, the reason I'm saying this is so that the context of the following is not lost on anyone, because I have been very critical of some of the things that Kyle Brink has said in the past. However, one of the things I have seen coming up in recent days since he went and did the interview on the Three Black Halflings YouTube channel is people taking this section of the interview where he's talking about the diversity hires at Wizards of the Coast and how they are actively working on ensuring that the future of Wizards of the Coast is and continues to expand upon having more diverse people with the right qualifications coming in and taking the roles that were previously held by white cis men. It's very important to have that conversation because we're no longer living in the Stone Ages when it was only white men being in a position of power. Um, he then makes a statement where white men like me can't get out of the way fast enough. And a lot of people have taken that quote completely out of context as though he is saying that Wizards of the Coast is anti white. That is not what is being said, and that is not what he said. That quote has been taken entirely out of context. Now, I am not defending Wizards of the Coast. If you have been here on my channel, if you've watched the 75 or 80 videos I've done surrounding the OGL fiasco over the last month, I've been covering this extensively here on my channel. I am not on Wizards of the Coast's side, nor am I on Kyle Brink's side per se. But I do think it's extremely unfair that he is being called out for something that he didn't actually say because people are taking this quote and using it as some sort of a reactionary piece of weaponry in this culture war culture that we live in. So we're going to be going through this today. We're going to be going through the entirety of the conversation. I've got it time stamped below. We're going to go through the entire section of this video where they talk about the diversity hires, and we're going to talk about it as we go through because you're going to hear him say some things that are all about the importance of bringing the right people on and helping to make the company more diverse as it moves forward. So let me say another thing here that's very important because I come from a background in construction originally. I worked as a third generation natural tile and natural stone and ceramic tile contractor for many, many years. My grandfather, my dad, my uncles, my cousins, we all grew up in that industry. That's what I did all my life until I was in my late 20s when I switched over to become a writer. That market, at the time that I was growing up in it, construction was a male dominated industry. It still largely is male in its representation of who is in the workforce. But all you have to do is go to TikTok, go to Instagram, go to YouTube, go to any social media platform, and you will find so many minorities and, more importantly, women who are now working in construction who are equally as talented, and they are finally having a chance to represent the trades in a way that was never possible before because it was never accepted. Even as shortly ago, how would I say that properly? Even as recently as, that would be the better way to put as recently as the late 90s, early 2000s, it was still a male dominated industry. Still is largely male, but we have way more females in it. And I just did a video the other day looking at the original first edition introduction to Dungeons and Dragons, where it's written that different Dungeons and Dragons is all about diversity, but they even make reference of it then that more and more women are even coming to the table now because when Dungeons and Dragons first started, it was dominated by a bunch of white dudes at tables. And then eventually women started wanting to play Dungeons and Dragons. And it's literally referenced in that first player's handbook that they were like, yeah, and we have women playing it too because it was a big deal that women were coming into the hobby because back then there weren't. And now we're having the same conversation in the modern era, but it's not just about women now. It's about people of all different minorities and all different, can I say, flavors of the rainbow without offending somebody out there? It's about everybody, regardless of their skin color, coming to the table. But what's also important is that the people getting hired are being hired for their qualifications, not just because of their skin color. So let's just dive in. I've been rambling for 7 minutes now, and I haven't even got to his commentary yet, which hopefully shows you how passionate I am about this subject because I really don't think that it's fair that people have thrown him under the bus for saying something that he didn't say. And even if his choice of words could have been better, the intent of what he was saying has nothing to do with racism against white people at all. That's something that people need to throw out the window. So let's go ahead and hit play on this. And hopefully I've got the audio levels. They might be off, but who knows? I'm not a professional in that regards. So let's get going here. All right, I've just adjusted the volume here, so we should be a little bit better on this. So I apologize for the snipping there. But we're going to now listen to this full conversation so that we can understand the full context of the part of the interview that people are misquoting here.
In terms of hiring diversity, this actually speaks to one thing that Orion Black said in their statements, which is that they believed that they were essentially a diversity hire. Which, look, we're all in favor of diversity, but ultimately, I think what makes the difference in a company like this is if you have minority people in positions of power. And while I'm sure that there have been numerous hirings of people from a variety of different minorities, at least in the case of racial minorities, I've met a number of people who, including yourself, who are fairly high up in D&D, and I think every single one of them has been white. And also, I think all of them have been cis men. Not to say that everybody there is a cis man, but it seems to be consistently that we have white cis men still at the top of these groups. Can you identify any specific positions of like significant power? Because I mean, even on the D&D team, you've still got Jeremy Crawford, you still got Mike Merles and so forth. What can you identify any specific positions that have like higher ranking positions that have been filled by people of, say, racially diverse backgrounds?
So before he answers, I think it's important to point out that he's referencing people who have been with the brand for many years and have proven that they are capable people who have done great things to move Dungeons and Dragons forward is, in the time that they've been there. Replacing those people just to fulfill a diversity checklist does nothing to help the company. It only hurts. So I say that for the added context of the conversation, because for what Kyle's about to say here.
I think if you look at the credits of our books, you'll see some lead designers there who are not cis men. You will also see a lot of primary authors on sources. These are folks who are coming up through the ranks and proving themselves and earning their respect, not because of who they are, but because of how they are as professionals.
It's very important here. So they are basically growing people from within who will eventually become, and he's going to reference this here in a minute. They are growing people from within who are hired from a diverse pool of individuals, and those people are earning their way up through the ranks based on merit, not based on diversity checklist items, and eventually are going to replace the people who have been there for quite some time. Because these guys who have been there for a while, and this is the point that Kyle makes in a little bit when he talks about guys like him are leaving. That's because they're getting older. They're eventually going to retire. And the people who are being trained now, the diversity hires that are being made now, the people who have the right qualifications, who are also part of the diverse workforce, are currently working their way up the ranks and will eventually replace the old timers who have been there for a while and, frankly, still deserve to be there because they've put in their time and helped get the brand to where it is today.
Which is the best kind of respect, right? You don't want to be respected because you're the diversity hire. You want to be respected because you're awesome at your job, and that's happening more and more. Look, guys like me, we're leaving the workforce, to be blunt, and we're
And that's fair. They're getting older. I'm one of those guys. I am a 43-year-old white cis male. I primarily work on YouTube these days. And the reason for that is because I don't feel the need to go out there and put myself into the workforce again because I've been working for more years than most people have. I grew up on a dairy farm and a cattle ranch and in the construction industry before I ever got into game development and writing for a living and doing YouTube and stuff. So I've been working since I was like 7 years old on job sites. And by the time I got to be 40, I was like, I've already put in 20 plus years and I don't really want to be out there in the workforce anymore. But that's just the reality. Guys like me, guys like Kyle, we're on our way out. We are on our way out because we're getting older.
also not. This is not the face of the hobby anymore.
Very important. So going back to the other day, we did that video on the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons. The introduction literally talks about how Dungeons and Dragons is for everyone. It's for a diverse array of players of all shapes, colors, sizes, so on and so forth. And it even has a portion in there where it's like, and there's even more women coming to the table and playing with us now because at the time it was a male dominated game, hobby, and they were incredulous that it was growing to the point where they had women coming to the table and actually joining the ranks of players. And that was back in like the 70s, and now here we are in the current generation, and it's not just about women, it's about all sorts of different minorities and peoples coming to the table. So the same conversation is being held, but at a greater level here.
I'm not the majority of this hobby anymore.
And that's the thing. The white dude sitting in the basement, who he's going to reference in a minute, is not the face of the hobby anymore and hasn't been for quite some time. Those are the days of the 70s and 80s and even through the 90s to some degree. But as we've seen with like Stranger Things and Critical Role and the Dungeon Dudes and so many other references in the modern era, D&D is about more than just a bunch of white dudes sitting around in a basement playing tabletop together.
And so it's important to me that my team of creators look like my players and have the lived experience that my players do.
In other words, a vast array of diverse people, because that's who's playing the hobby now, not just a bunch of white dudes in a basement.
And I think there's been mistakes made in years past where people assumed that D&D players were all, white dudes in a basement, which has been a faulty assumption for a lot of years and gets more and more false every day.
And the reason he says that is going back to the fact that just as they were surprised back in the 70s because women were coming to the table, now more and more people are coming to the table. So that false assumption that D&D and tabletop is just a hobby for a bunch of, slobby, overweight, bad hygiene white dudes sitting together in a basement playing, that perception has gone out the window as the hobby has expanded and our values as society have changed, and more people accept Dungeons and Dragons now as being something for everyone as opposed to being only something for white nerdy dudes. It's an important part of the context of this conversation.
So it's, in my viewpoint, honestly, guys like me can't leave soon enough.
And that's the part where he gets in trouble because everyone's latching onto that part without any context of the conversation that's being had.
For this hobby. And we owe you good games. We owe you good products. And so we need to make sure that everybody working on it is real good at it. And that means not just hiring, but also developing, right? When we bring people in who are good, we need to empower them, give them more room to run, give them guidance on what we learned when we were creating stuff so that they can create great stuff too. And then, I always hire people smarter than me so that I can get out of their way. That's my approach. And so as long as we stay on this trajectory, this is the face of D&D will literally change.
That's a very important thing that he just said because he's not saying it has nothing to do with racism. He's literally saying for the purpose of the hobby continuing to grow and expand, guys like me, like we can't get out of the way fast enough. Like because for many years it was always this misconception that it was guys like me sitting in a basement playing the game, and now people are starting to realize that it's more than that, and that's a good thing. So the perception of it being just a hobby for white guys, that can't change fast enough. Guys like me need to get out of the way, not because we're racist against white people, but because for the purposes of inclusivity and bringing everybody to the table, breaking down that perception and ensuring that that goes out the window so that everyone is welcome at the table, that is the important part of this. And then he goes on to talk about how the face of D&D will literally change as the new people we're bringing on now are guided and are helped along the way to become the next leadership of the company, the next leaders of the company, because right now all of the diversity hires they're making are eventually going to replace Kyle Brinks and Crawford and all these other people who are the white cis dudes who have been there for a while and who have helped make I don't know about Kyle in particular because I don't know what he did before. I don't know his exact, some people have said he was only hired 3 months ago. I don't know that enough about this guy in particular, but I know some of the other people they mentioned have been there for quite some time. But what Kyle is talking about here is the evolution of the face of the company changing over time as all of these hires that they've been bringing on grow with the company and eventually grow into a position of leadership. This has nothing to do with him saying that white dudes are no longer welcome at the table and that white dudes are suddenly, not the people that Wizards of the Coast wants. That's not what is being said here, and the people who have taken that out of context, I think, need to take a step back and stop being so reactionary and actually listen to the conversation that's being had, because this is a very adult conversation about the importance of, yes, hiring diverse people, but making sure that the people who are being hired are the right people for the job, not just because they're diverse, but because they are qualified and they can take the company in the directions that it needs to go into the future. And the face of that brand will change as the old guard moves out and the new people come in and replace those. So it has nothing to do with race. It's about the perception of the game changing and how white guys can't get out of the way fast enough to help that change happen, to help that perception change. Nothing about racism here. Don't get it twisted, folks. If you've gotten to the end and you appreciate the things I'm saying and you agree, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon because we're going to have more conversations like this. If you've been around my channel for any length of time, those of you who are old schools who have been here for a while, you know that I talk about this a lot. We talk a lot about, like when we were talking about Rings of Power and the people who were making these crazy claims about the woke show and all this other stuff, and we were talking about looking at a show like Carnival Row or Sense 8, where they have amazing diverse casts of trans actors and gay actors and people of all minorities coming together in a way that's not forced. That's what they're talking about here, is making sure that the people who are being hired and guided towards future management are done so because they're the right people for the job, all while also being diverse, so that we can have this industry change from being just a bunch of white dudes from the 60s and 70s into being something more. I, again, am not in favor of Wizards of the Coast. I have been very critical of things that Kyle Brink has said in the past. If you haven't watched any of my previous videos and you attempt to make a claim that I'm somehow saying something other than I didn't, that's a you problem, not a me problem. Hopefully, you enjoyed this conversation and you understood the depth of what is being discussed here. Support if you can, if you like all that stuff. Drop a super thanks, drop a super chat, join as a member down here. If you want to get involved with our tabletop project, there is a Patreon page, there's a Discord channel. All the links are down there. Hopefully, we'll see you in the next video, as well as on Sundays for our tabletop discussions that happen every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Central. Until then, everybody, stay safe, happy gaming, and more importantly, don't take things out of context. Just don't have knee-jerk reactions. Take a deep breath, read in great detail, investigate, educate yourself, and then let's have an adult conversation about these topics, because they're sensitive topics, but they need to be talked about, but in a way. I thought this was a very responsible, way to have this conversation. No one was having any sort of knee-jerk reactions. No one was yelling or screaming or accusing other people of anything. I thought it was a great way to approach the conversation. And yeah, until then, next time, everybody. Cheers.